I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My topic today is deep fakes, Eisenstein and RFK. I'm going to be looking at what has brought me to the inescapable conclusion that Charles Eisenstein is lying to us. Not just naive, not captured like we've debated about Robert F. Kennedy, but actually intentionally complicit. And I've come to that conclusion for both of them. I'm going to go through what it was that led me to that, looking specifically at Alison McDowell's evidence, and also some things that I can bring from my own experience. And by the way, I'm out of flowers because I'm going to be traveling soon. So instead, I borrowed my daughter's lava lamp, which seemed to me appropriate for Charles and the fake woo-woo. Alison McDowell has been a real gift to me. There are many things we have in common. She lives in Philadelphia, which is where I did my undergraduate work. We both cut our teeth trying to reform the public school system as parents. And that was a wasted decade of my life, but a real lesson in understanding the futility of certain actions and why they were so entrenched, and why, as she also says, parents have no seat at the table. And then my next decade was spent on the futility of global philanthropy. I thought that was a way I could work with people who were not trying to work in their own interest and were working for the good of all. But hers was environmentalism, which I think was very much the same. For both of us, we at one point would have said we were liberals, although I think both of us have always been radicals, a word that means going to the root. And the root of everything is economics, which is, of course, the topic of my book, How to Dismantle an Empire. And I go through the history of money in a way that is very synchronistic with Alison, because not only does Alison talk about all the different things that I talk about, like the tokenization, financialization of the commons and taking over nature, also about things like derivatives and these different ways that we're gambling rather than actually having money. But she also looks at things in the perspective of colonization. And that is what my book starts out with, is that my whole first section is called Pieces of Slave, because that's what the money that we use is backed by. We are trading in pieces of slave. But the greatest commonality I feel Alison and I have is that we're mothers. And we look at the world from, how is this going to affect the next generation? Is this what I want my kids or any kids to be living in? So anthropologists will say that when men and women come into any form of wealth, they act differently. Women will use it to enhance the security of the family, whereas men will gamble with it. This is why I think Alison is not taken in by the whole cryptocurrency Bitcoin world. They are, in my words, a form of gambling. They are something that's like the stock market, where you are betting on this token that really has no inherent value, but you're giving imperial currencies in exchange for it. And those go to someone and become part of their wealth, and in exchange, you have this share that some other sucker may end up buying from you for more. In what? In another imperial currency. So what actually does that give you? What that gives you are pieces of slave. That makes it where you can get the goods that you need to live. You can preserve your wealth, your advantage, your privilege, if you will. The strongest agenda that Eisenstein and Kennedy have in common is the cryptocurrency world. And Alison shows a clip of RFK giving a talk to a Bitcoin convention where he says, "Your support of Bitcoin puts you in the same category as the framers who brought us the Bill of Rights and the Constitution." And then Alison started, "Well, I'm in Philadelphia." And I thought, we're going to part ways here. She's going to say, "There's no way you guys are like the framers." But no, we are still tracking. Instead, she cited someone named Tim Scott who posted in the Dissident Voice on the duplicitous nature of the Constitution and how that was really written by those in power as another power grab. And if you've seen my episode on the Constitution Convention coup, you know that I believe that the convention was a way of reversing all the gains that had been made by the people who fought the revolution, which is what I write about in my book, and talk about how the revolution was fought for local economies, Ben Franklin's scrip system, and that was outlawed by the Currency Act, and so they fought to get that back. Shays' Revolution happened to get that back, and the Constitution made sure that it would never happen again. So, in that sense, perhaps the Bitcoin supporters are just like the constitutional framers, who are the opposite, by the way, of the people who wrote the Bill of Rights, who were the ones who were called the anti-federalists, who were actually the ones who were for a federal government. What was my breaking point with Charles was the presentation Alison does on his talk to Bretton Woods. Friggin' Bretton Woods! This is the home of 75 years ago, setting up the World Bank, the IMF, all of the international trade, everything that has made the post-World War II era into what we have today, this entire colonial system. But that wasn't the first point she made. First, she talked about that legendary serendipitous meeting at the falconry event where Charles Eisenstein gets invited by someone who wins the contest, and they meet for the first time and decide that he's going to be the troubadour, as Alison puts it, for the Camelot adventure. They did not meet there. They did a podcast together a year prior in which Bobby showed that he was quite familiar with Charles's work. What I've said is that once you catch someone in one lie, no matter how small, you can never again say they wouldn't lie. You can only say, are they doing that now? Another example of Charles lying, and I'm not going to use the euphemism of being duplicitous, is in his Substack when he posted photos that he said were taken by a friend of his about these prisons. Maybe it was Cambodia or I forget, somewhere else. And later, after we were all horrified by seeing these pictures, someone pointed out that they were AI generated. And he backtracked and talked about them, but these had been given to him by his friend, the photographer. There is no way that that just happens by accident. This was atrocity porn. This was him putting this fear of this is this world that we're heading into. And it should have set me off then. I feel like learning that was the same as my Malone moment. I remember reading Robert Malone's Just the Facts, where he presented his side of the Bregan case, and just sat back and didn't participate in the threads. And I started arguing with someone point by point for why actually his lawsuit didn't make any sense, that this was not about justifying it. It was really about intimidation. And suddenly I realized that the Bregans were right, that he was on the side of the CIA, if not actually working for them, and that he would know, that I would know that he was lying by what I had written in the thread. And at that time, I didn't know anyone in the world who agreed with me, and it would take me 18 more episodes to really analyze all the reasons and lay them out. But at that moment, I knew for a fact that he was lying. And that's my feeling about Charles Eisenstein. To put this in perspective, Malone talks about this fifth-generation warfare. What is that? First, you have things like the COVID con, and that would be the central psyop. Then you have people who are going to see through that, and so you need to have the controlled opposition who's going to be against that. That is RFK and Malone. But then you're going to have the people who question them. So you need another layer of apologists, of those who can suck in those who are rebelling against that. And that's where I think, say, Meryl Nass for Robert Malone and Charles Eisenstein for Bobby Kennedy come in. I think there's probably a fourth layer that also includes people who know that they're lying, not just the people lying to themselves. But the fifth layer, I believe, are going to be all those people who are just volunteering because they buy into that psyops. How Alison describes the con is that they are focusing on pushing back against authoritarian control, meaning government control, and that instead what you're going to have, according to Bobby, is the free market is going to regulate everything. So you have this liberty and freedom and privacy. And then from Charles Eisenstein, he looks at things like universal basic income and debt jubilee. So I think they're playing both the masculine and feminine sides of this. The masculine with the gambling and the feminine with the, oh, but how will we take care of people? And both of those are fake ways, I think, of looking at that dichotomy, and also something for nothing. The only way that money works in our society is that 1 hour of your time is worth several hours of someone else's time. Otherwise, we couldn't be all spending our lives making the rich richer, working for those corporations, because all the things that we need, we wouldn't be able to get, because our time would be spent and all it would buy us is 1 hour of a farm worker or laborer's time. What needs to happen is that we have all that slave labor that enables us to be servants then to the rich. We can do that middleman job and be able to enhance the profits, but all of our money is backed by slavery. What was the story that Charles told to the Bretton Woods Conference of Central Bankers? He said, I'm going to channel the voice of the earth. I am Gaia and I'm dying. It's already too late. There's another spirit that's waiting to inhabit the earth. And there will come this time of both giving and taking equally. But for right now, we need to show our fitness for this. We need to move from Mother Earth, where Mother Earth is giving, to Lover Earth, where we are giving. And that's going to prove that we are worthy for this next phase. What are these gifts that are going to be the courtship of Lover Earth? A while back, Charles had an animation that someone had gifted him from one of his readings. And in this animation, there is a time of great hardship. There's wars, there's famine, it's a lot of conflict. And then it comes to this resolution where all of these people make this journey. And they come, and of course, they're all different types of people and have all the representations of the indigenous and black, and I'm not sure how many different categories, but I'm sure they were all there. And they come to the edge of this cliff, this abyss, and they hold hands. And starting with this one woman, they just fall. It is a mass suicide. It is an extinction. It is a sacrifice to the volcano god. I look back at that now and I think, how did I not get it? At the time I thought, ooh, this is dark. This is supposed to be inspirational. But that is what Charles sees as the gift we're going to give our lives so that the spirit that is waiting to inhabit the earth can come and take it. In hearing that, I realized that what Greta is to the WEF in terms of co-opting the environmental movement, Eisenstein is to Bretton Woods in co-opting those who are pushing back against the economic system. This is a 3-hour, 40-minute presentation, and so Alison goes into a lot of detail, as she is known for, of mapping out all of the networks and Eisenstein's connections to different people, including a company I think called Cello, and his financial ties, and all of the other influences that show that he is not just dropping in here randomly as some person who met RFK at a falconry exhibit. So this is something that is leading us towards this gamified life, as she calls it, where there's a tokenization of the commons, and we're given tokens for good behavior. This is really obedience training. This is not success-based orientation. And many of her other episodes have been fascinating, looking at impact financing and all of the things that are utterly insidious and moving us towards this idea that this is all philanthropic and it's going to decentralize. And by the way, when I talked about my work being all about decentralized systems, that was when Robert Malone subscribed to me. My own experience with Charles is that I was invited to interview him a dozen years ago when I had a radio show. I asked him questions about his economic plan because he gives the example of, yes, this person watches kids for me and I bake bread for her and somebody else does this. And what I said was, those are all services. You're all exchanging services, but man cannot live by services alone, nor can woman. And so the goods that you all need, the energy, the food, the fuel, these have to be provided from outside your circle. So how do you do that? Are you really still depending on slaves to do your work while you all just provide services to each other? And he did not really have an answer to that, but it shows how superficial his book on sacred economics is. There is no teeth to it. There is no system to it. It is this gift economy, but you cannot go directly from a slave-backed economy to a gift economy, because somewhere in between you have to pass through reciprocity, where people do real work and provide goods, and that those goods have some kind of token that get them something. In the same interview, I asked him about A Course in Miracles, because everything that he says sounds like it comes right out of there. That's why he and I have a lot of commonality in terms of terms that we use, like inner being and looking at this oneness. And he said, "Oh, I get that question all the time, but no, I've never read it." If people were telling you that there was a 1,200-page channeled text directly from God that said exactly what you've been saying, you would read it. Come on, of course you would. The reason that the Course spoke to me was because I had come to a lot of those conclusions on my own before I read it. So for Charles to say, "Oh, no, I haven't bothered," is completely bullshit. Of course he's read it, and of course he's using it. He is a spiritual grifter. He's someone who takes those terms, bundles them up, and then makes them mean their exact opposite. Alison asked the key question on economics, which is, who holds the power? The way I phrase that in my book is, who owns the wealth that backs the money? Who is the default owner of the assets when they change hands? And that, of course, is the central bankers, because the money's issued through mortgages, and we assume that they have the absolute right to just issue that credit and have us pay them back with 30 years of our labor with dual incomes. There is nothing you can change until you change that. I got Sacred Economics, I think, included with the admission to a talk that Charles was giving. And this was something a friend dragged me to so I could hear a real economist. These days, people throw the book Donut Economics at me, and Alison has a lot to say about that too. Another reason I love her. So I realized I hadn't even opened this, because I think I was cynical about him at that time, to realize the inscription was, "Enjoy well." What the hell does that mean? That has nothing to do with the other person. That's more of a compliment to yourself. Enjoy my book. It's a gift to you. So I realized at that talk, which wasn't a very big one, that Charles did not want to engage with anyone. He kept himself very separate. He gave no opportunity for anyone to approach him. I only talked to him because he and I happened to be in the line for the bathroom at the same time. So he is, if you watch him, a very asocial guy. He does not like people. I don't hold that against him, but it's very opposite of the persona that he's trying to put forward. I also talked to someone sometime who had known him before he was Charles Eisenstein, when he was, I believe it was, a kombucha salesman, and someone who was like a kombucha barista at these different festivals, and that the entire group and all the different vendors had a good relationship with each other and would hang out, but not Charles. According to him, Charles was very aloof and never wanted to be a part of that. So now that I am on to him, there are so many tells in terms of his personal style. All you have to do is watch him and realize there is no warmth. There is no sense of enjoyment and humanity that I see. Some of the other eco-spiritual psychobabble that Charles used in the conference was that the inner being causal principle is morphic resonance. And this reminded me that someone recently mentioned that Rupert Sheldrake talks about morphic resonance. She also mentioned, Alison, that Daniel Pinchbeck was the publisher of Sacred Economics. Daniel Pinchbeck was actually the first person I ever interviewed, and I have 2 of his books here. And I would say, once again, it's that spiritual grifter. It's someone who made his career based on saying 2012, everything's going to change in 2012. And 2012 came and went. And it had that indigenous, we're bringing in everyone in the sacred and we're listening to the signs. And in the end, that was just the opiate of the masses, if we want to call it that, for the hippie age. Alison also brings up Riane Eisler. And this is someone who has rewritten Darwin and is saying, oh, it was really all about cooperation. And that's utter BS. I've talked about Darwin. He was a racist snob who only believed in his own superiority. In a story about Riane Eisler, I once put in an application for the first local TED Talks that we put on and got up to the final running. And then they wanted me to cut my talk down to 3 minutes so that it was only this little feel-good story about my daughter and cut out everything about the actual economic system. And so I declined and pulled back my application. I found out later that they had planned to slot me right before Riane, which kind of figures. In the Substack, I'll include a Kim Iverson interview of Whitney Webb, in which they talk about whether Robert Kennedy is captured. Is there a way in which he's being blackmailed? Because surely this isn't really how he feels about Israel. He couldn't possibly, because he's such a nice guy. He's so sincere. And what I have to say is he is no more charming than Obama, who golfed while Gaza burned and said there's nothing I can do because I'm not president yet, even though he bailed out the bankers before he was. And that genocide ended on the day of the inauguration. This is no accident, and Bobby Kennedy, you can't excuse anything to me with that level of cowardice, even if you are captured. There's far more I have in my notes on the economic side, and I'll be delving into that in an episode on my system and how it is similar to those in form and very, very different in terms of purpose. In the meantime, here's one on the space between stories on Charles Eisenstein, and this is the playlist on Kennedy for both the good and the bad. Thank you for watching.